the governor of the Bank of England yesterday. I mean, his understanding of the economy is frankly as close to a lottery.
I mean, Mr. Bailey, Andrew Bailey.
I knew he would do it, but it was so obviously completely the wrong thing to do.
Yeah.
Here is a man who frankly started raising interest rates way too late.
Yeah.
He had basically 2 jobs to do. One was to control inflation, and he failed at that.
Well, he said he couldn't, didn't he? I mean, he actually came out as the governor of the Bank of England and said, I can't control inflation. Well, what are you doing there then?
Well, so that was his first job, which he's failed at. Right. And then his second job was to ensure stability in the financial markets, which he patently failed at when Liz Truss was briefly Prime Minister. So the 2 things that he's tasked with, he's completely failed. Look, the reality is we've got what they call cost-push inflation, and raising interest rates only affects those homeowners who've got a variable mortgage.
Yeah.
That's the reality. And small businesses who are trying to grow and invest invest in new kit and new staff to grow the economy. If they need to borrow some money, that's going to cost them a lot more. The whole thing's just
I was listening to
absurd.
Christina Jardine this morning on, I think she was on with James Max, the Lib Dem MP for Edinburgh, funnily enough, and she was talking about, people through no fault of their own are having to pay higher mortgages. Well, it's not entirely true to say through no fault of their own. They did actually take out a mortgage, and while I have some sympathy for people whose mortgages are going up, unfortunately that's what happens in a free market. Sometimes the mortgage rate goes up, and if you can't afford it, then I'm afraid you have to sell the house.
The point is, though, that people expect competence from the people running our key institutions.
Yeah, I've got some bad news for them.
And regrettably, that assumption has turned out to be totally and utterly flawed.
I mean, if you could search for competency in Whitehall, you'd be looking for a long time.
You'd be looking for in fact, frankly, you have got more chance of finding a winning lottery ticket at the moment.
You really have. But the truth about what's going on is interesting, because we had a call yesterday from a guy who was in the banking sector in 2008, and he said to me that the LIBOR rates, which are the rates at which banks borrow money from each other, effectively, are looking as if they're going in a very similar direction to what was happening in 2008. And he said to me that we are heading for a similar kind of banking crash.
Well, that's why, and I gave a press conference yesterday when I said that the Office for Budget Responsibility is being completely, utterly complacent in its forecast. It thinks that inflation for the next 3 years, after this current year, is going to drop to below 1%. It's never been below 1% for 3 consecutive years in living memory. So it thinks inflation's going to drop to that level. In reality, I think it'll be somewhat more than that, which means higher spending. It means also you're going to have a much higher deficit, which means the interest rates will have to stay higher for longer.
Also, the government keeps just putting its hand into some secret vault and pulling more money out of it.
Well, it's called the printing machine, so it just prints more money.
But they've just given the teachers a pay rise. They've already given the nurses a pay rise. They haven't settled with the junior doctors yet, but I dare say they will. But they've also given loads more money to Ukraine. They've given loads more money to the welfare state, because we've got 5 million...
They're doing exactly the wrong thing.
Yeah.
They are acting like socialists. They are raising taxes, and they're raising wasteful government spending. They need to do exactly the opposite.
And only
You've
this
got to
week...
slash spending, wasteful spending, of which all of your listeners and viewers will be aware of, in all walks of life. So you've got to cut wasteful spending, and you've got to cut consumer taxes. That brings inflation down. And then you've got to invest that saving in that's how you grow the economy. You stimulate activity. Lower prices, lower fuel duty, for example, that will create more activity.
If their argument is we're putting up the interest rates to stem inflation, to stop it from going any higher, why then are they putting up the prices of alcohol and putting more taxes on basically sellable items, because people have to spend more money?
Because they are socialists and they are utterly stupid, and they don't understand mathematically how inflation works. If you put taxes on things, guess what? The price goes up, inflation goes up, which is why we're advocating exactly the opposite. And the OBR also, their growth forecasts are, again, woefully optimistic. If our forecasts are right, then I feel our deficit's going to be 250 billion a year in the coming years, and that is going to lead to a debt crisis that your commentator discussed yesterday.
We will all have to pay the price. And meanwhile, the NHS is begging for more money, which the government is planning to give them. Meanwhile, there's going to be more money spent on this North Sea oil exploration and the expansion of the carbon capture business, And again, it's all about money going out and nothing coming in.
And what we need is, you can't tax your way out of a crisis. You've got to grow your way out of a crisis. And the way you do that is you cut wasteful spending, you cut taxes for the private sector to get some growth going, to get some activity. That's what you've got to do. And if we don't do that, then we are heading in a doom loop downwards.